It was a cold winter day when Donald Trump arrived at one of New York's largest children's hospitals. The sharp chill outside was a stark contrast to the warmth and determination radiating from the people inside. The pediatric ward, with its brightly colored walls and cheerful decorations, carried a bittersweet atmosphere. Behind every painted mural and every smiling nurse was the silent weight of battles being fought, battles for life, for strength, and for hope. Trump walked through the long, quiet hallway, pausing every so often to greet the children and their families. His footsteps slowed as he neared the last room at the end of the corridor. Through the half-open door, he saw her, Lily. She was a fragile-looking 8-year-old girl, lying in a small hospital bed. Her complexion was pale, almost translucent, but her wide, curious eyes seemed to glow with an inner light. She wore a green knit cap that was slightly too big for her small head, and a thick blanket was wrapped snugly around her slender frame. In her hands, she clutched a small, well-worn Bible, her tiny fingers running gently along its edges as if it were a treasure. Trump hesitated for a moment, taking in the scene. There was something about her, a quiet strength, a resilience that defied her frail appearance. He adjusted his tie, softened his expression, and stepped into the room. "Hi there," he said, his voice warm and friendly as he approached her bed. "You must be Lily, right?" The girl looked up at him, her expression shifting from curiosity to recognition. A shy smile appeared on her lips. "You look absolutely lovely today," Trump added, pulling a chair closer and sitting down beside her. Lily's smile widened just a bit, though her voice was barely above a whisper. "You're Donald Trump, aren't you? I've seen you on TV so many times." Trump chuckled softly, his hand resting lightly on the armrest of her bed. "You got that right," he said with a small laugh, leaning in slightly. "But today, I'm not the special one. The real star here is you." As he spoke, he reached out, gently taking her small hand in his. It felt delicate, almost weightless in his grasp, but there was warmth there, a quiet determination that mirrored the sparkle in her eyes. "Thank you," Lily murmured, glancing down at their hands. "But I don't feel very special." "Oh, but you are," Trump said earnestly, his tone softening further. "You're stronger than you know. Lily, just sitting here with you, I can tell you're someone extraordinary." Lily tilted her head slightly, her gaze locked on his face as if trying to decipher whether he truly meant it. After a moment, she said, "I'm not sure about that, Mr. Trump. I'm just me." Trump smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Sometimes, being just you is the most special thing of all," he replied. "And let me tell you something. Everyone in this hospital, everyone in this room, they're rooting for you, including me." Lily's grip on the Bible tightened slightly as she glanced at her parents, who stood quietly in the corner of the room, watching the exchange with glistening eyes. The atmosphere shifted, the weight of the moment growing just a little heavier, but also somehow brighter. The conversation had only just begun, but in those brief moments, it was clear to everyone in the room that something profound was unfolding. After a few moments of light-hearted chatting, Lily's demeanor began to shift. Her gaze softened but grew more intent, as if she were working up the courage to ask something that had been on her mind for a long time. She looked at Trump, her wide eyes glistening with unshed tears. Her small hands tightened their grip on the Bible she had been holding, the edges of its worn leather cover pressed gently against her fingers. "Mr. Trump," she began hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. Trump leaned in closer, his expression one of complete focus. "What is it, Lily?" he asked gently, sensing the seriousness of her tone. Lily slowly opened her Bible, flipping carefully through its thin, well-loved pages. She stopped at a section marked with a colorful ribbon, hesitated for a moment, then smoothed the page with her tiny hand. Taking a deep breath, she read aloud, her voice trembling slightly. "The Bible says, He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain." That's from Revelation, chapter 21, verse 4. She looked up, meeting Trump's gaze directly. Her voice was soft but steady, filled with a kind of longing that was far too deep for a child her age. "Does that mean heaven is real? Will I get to see my grandma there?" The words hung in the air like a prayer, filling the room with a poignant stillness. Every sound seemed to fade away, the hum of the machines, the faint shuffle of footsteps in the hallway. It was as if the world itself had paused to listen. The nurses standing nearby exchanged glances, their hands instinctively moving to their mouths, trying to hold back tears. Lily's parents, who had been standing quietly in the corner, froze in place, their expressions a mix of heartbreak and hope. For a moment, Trump was at a loss for words. The weight of her question, its purity and sincerity, struck him in a way he hadn't expected. He glanced down at the Bible in her lap, the verse she had read seeming to echo in his mind. When he looked back up at Lily, his expression had softened, and his eyes carried an unmistakable depth of emotion. He cleared his throat lightly, buying himself a second to collect his thoughts. "That's a beautiful verse, Lily," he began, his voice quiet but firm. "And it's one of my favorites, too. You see, that verse isn't just words, it's a promise. A promise from God that there is a place where there's no more pain, no more sadness. A place where we can all be together again with the people we love." Lily's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but she held his gaze, waiting for him to continue. Trump leaned back slightly, folding his hands as he spoke. "I know it's hard to understand sometimes, but heaven is real, Lily. It's as real as the love you feel for your grandma. And yes, I believe with all my heart that you'll see her there again one day." The room remained silent, everyone hanging on to his words. Lily tilted her head slightly, her expression a mixture of hope and vulnerability. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but then closed it again. Looking down at her Bible, her tiny fingers traced the ribbon marking the verse, as if drawing strength from its presence. The sincerity in her question and the profoundness of the moment left no one untouched. It was a question many had asked at some point in their lives, but hearing it from Lily, in her small, fragile voice, made it feel more raw, more immediate. In that quiet hospital room, surrounded by the hum of machines and the soft murmurs of life continuing in the background, her question became a prayer for everyone who had ever hoped for something greater, a reminder of faith, of love, and of the enduring human spirit. Trump shifted slightly in his chair, his gaze softening as he gently held Lily's hand a little tighter. There was a pause, a moment of quiet reflection, before he began speaking in a tone that was both warm and deeply sincere. "Lily," he said, his voice carrying a hint of vulnerability, "I want to tell you a story about someone very special to me. My brother, Robert. He was one of the kindest, most caring people you could ever meet. He loved his family deeply. He always put others before himself, no matter what was happening. He had this way of making you feel like everything was going to be okay." Lily's big, curious eyes were fixed on him, her small fingers clutching the edge of her blanket. She nodded slightly, urging him to continue. "A few years ago," Trump continued, his voice dipping slightly, "Robert passed away. It was one of the hardest moments of my life. You see, when someone you love leaves, it feels like a piece of your heart goes with them. And for a while, I didn't know how to deal with that kind of pain." He paused, glancing down at their joined hands for a brief moment before looking back into Lily's eyes. "But you know what I did, Lily?" he asked. his tone growing steadier. "I turned to God's Word. I opened the Bible, just like you did today, and I found comfort in the verses that reminded me of God's promises. And do you know what I realized?" Lily shook her head slightly, her lips pressed together in quiet anticipation. "I realized," Trump said, leaning in just a little, "that heaven is real. It's the place God has prepared for all of us, a place where there's no more pain, no sadness, no goodbyes. It's a place where we'll see the people we love again. I believe that with all my heart, Lily, and I know, without a single doubt, that Robert is there. He's waiting for me." Lily blinked, her wide eyes shimmering as she absorbed his words. For a moment, the room felt smaller, as if it were just the two of them in their own little world. Trump continued, his voice softening further. "You know," he said, "when I think about Robert, I don't just feel sadness anymore. I feel hope. I feel peace. Because I know he's in a place where he's happy, where he's whole again. And one day, when it's time, I'll get to see him. I'll get to tell him everything that's happened. And we'll laugh together, just like we always did." He smiled gently, his eyes carrying a mix of grief and gratitude. "And Lily," he added, his voice firm but kind, "that same promise is true for you. The people you love, like your grandma, they're in that same place, watching over you, proud of you. And one day, you'll see them again, too." Lily's grip on his hand tightened ever so slightly, her lips trembling as if she wanted to speak but wasn't quite ready yet. The room was quiet, the weight of his words hanging in the air like a sacred truth. It was a moment of connection, one that transcended age, circumstance, and even pain. In that small hospital room, through the gentle exchange of words and stories, hope found its way into a little girl's heart. Lily sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, her small hand still resting in Trump's much larger one. Her gaze dropped to the Bible in her lap, her fingers brushing against its worn edges. She seemed lost in thought, processing everything he had just told her. The room was so quiet you could hear the faint hum of medical monitors in the background. Finally, Lily broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper, but filled with an almost childlike hope. "So, my grandma is there too, right?" she asked, lifting her eyes to meet his. Trump's expression softened, and a gentle smile spread across his face. He leaned in just a little closer, speaking with a quiet certainty that filled the room with warmth. "Yes, Lily," he said, his tone firm yet tender. "Your grandma is definitely there. In God's embrace. She's safe, happy, and whole again. And she's smiling down on you every single day. So proud of how strong and brave you are." Lily's lips trembled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "She is?" she asked, as if needing to hear it again, needing to believe it with all her heart. Trump nodded, his smile growing just a little wider. "Absolutely," he assured her. "God loves all of us, Lily, and he always keeps his promises. That verse you read, it's not just words on a page. It's real. It's the truth. Heaven is a place where your grandma is right now, surrounded by peace and love, watching over you." He reached for the small Bible in Lily's hands, his movements slow and deliberate. She released it to him willingly, her fingers lingering on the cover for just a moment before letting go. Trump flipped to the marked page, the colorful ribbon still in place, and pointed to the verse she had read earlier. "You see this," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "This isn't just a promise someone made a long time ago. This is God's promise. It's his truth. He's telling us that heaven is real, that it's a place where there's no more pain or sadness. And your grandma, she's there. Lily, she's in the most peaceful place, held by the one who loves her the most." Lily stared at the page, her small fingers moving to touch the words as if trying to feel their meaning. Her eyes lingered on the verse, and for the first time in a long while, a small smile played at the corners of her lips. Trump watched her carefully, his expression a mix of compassion and quiet resolve. He placed the Bible gently back in her lap, patting it lightly. "Whenever you miss her," he added, "just remember this verse. It's like a little piece of heaven you can carry with you, a reminder that she's always close, even if you can't see her." Lily nodded slowly, her gaze still fixed on the open Bible. "Thank you, Mr. Trump," she said softly, her voice trembling with gratitude. "I'll try to remember that." The room seemed to exhale, the heavy silence replaced with a newfound sense of peace. The nurses standing nearby exchanged glances, their eyes glistening, while Lily's parents held on to each other, visibly moved by the exchange. In that moment, a quiet but powerful connection had been made, not just between Trump and Lily, but among everyone in the room. It was a shared moment of faith, hope, and love, a reminder of the strength that could be found in God's promises and the unshakable bond of family. Lily sat in silence for what felt like a long time. Her small hand fidgeted with the edges of her blanket. Her head bowed slightly as she avoided Trump's gaze. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of medical monitors in the background. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft and tinged with sadness. "But fighting is so painful, Mr. Trump," she said, her words trembling as if they carried the weight of the world. "I don't know if I can keep going anymore." Her confession hung in the air, raw and unfiltered. The nurses in the room exchanged glances, their eyes glistening with empathy, while Lily's parents, standing silently in the corner, gripped each other's hands tightly, as if willing themselves to be strong for her. Trump leaned in closer, his expression gentle yet firm. He studied her for a moment, his heart clearly touched by the bravery it took for such a small child to voice such a profound struggle. "Lily," he began, his voice filled with compassion, "I can't imagine how hard this must be for you, but there's something I want you to know, something very important." He pointed to the small Bible resting in her lap, its well-worn cover showing just how often it had been opened and read. "Do you see that book you're holding? That's not just a book of stories. It's a book of promises." Lily looked up at him, her wide eyes filled with curiosity and a flicker of hope. "In the Bible," Trump continued, his voice steady, "Jesus said, 'Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest.' That's from Matthew 11 verse 28. Do you know what that means, Lily?" She shook her head slowly, her small fingers tracing the edges of the Bible. "It means that God sees you," Trump said, his tone growing softer but more resolute. "He knows you're tired. He knows how hard this fight is for you. But he also wants you to know something else, that you are never alone. He's with you, every step of the way. He's giving you the strength to keep going, even when it feels like you can't." Lily's lip trembled slightly, her eyes glistening as she absorbed his words. "You're a little warrior, Lily," Trump added, leaning closer still. "And God is so proud of you. Do you know that? He's proud of how strong you are, of how much you've already overcome, and he's walking this road with you, even when it feels hard." Lily nodded faintly, but the weight of her struggle still lingered on her face. Sensing this, Trump continued, his voice filled with both encouragement and a quiet urgency. "Heaven, Lily, is a beautiful place," he said, his tone growing warmer. "But it's not where you need to be right now. There are still so many amazing things waiting for you here. There are joys you haven't even discovered yet, dreams you haven't dreamed yet, and people who are going to be so blessed just because they got to know you." He paused, letting the words sink in, then smiled gently. "You don't fight because of the pain, Lily," he said, his voice soft but firm. You fight because of the beautiful things ahead, the laughter, the love, the difference you're going to make in the lives of the people around you. Every day you keep going. You're writing a story that inspires everyone who sees it. Lily's eyes filled with tears, but this time, they weren't tears of despair. There was a quiet determination in her gaze, a spark of hope reignited by his words. "So," Trump said, his voice dropping to a gentle whisper, "what do you say, Lily? Will you keep fighting? Not just for you, but for all the amazing things waiting for you out there?" For the first time in what felt like forever, a small but genuine smile broke across Lily's face. She looked down at the Bible in her lap, her fingers gripping it a little tighter, and then she nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll try, Mr. Trump," she said. "I'll keep fighting." The room seemed to exhale, as if everyone had been holding their breath, waiting for that moment of resolve. Trump smiled, his hands still resting gently on hers. "That's all anyone can ask, Lily," he said, "one day at a time. And remember, you've got an entire team cheering you on, your family, your nurses, me, and, most importantly, God. You're never alone in this fight." Lily's smile grew just a little wider, her eyes glimmering with newfound courage. The quiet strength of her spirit began to shine through, a light that seemed to fill the entire room. Lily's eyes brimmed with tears, her small shoulders trembling as she held back the sobs that threatened to escape. But these weren't the tears of defeat or despair that had weighed on her earlier. These were different, lighter, filled with something deeper, a spark of emotion and understanding that had been missing for a long time. She sniffled softly, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of her fragile hope. "So, if I keep fighting, God will always be with me, right?" Her question lingered in the air, delicate and profound, cutting through the quiet hum of the hospital room. Everyone froze, her parents holding their breath, the nurses wiping their eyes discreetly in the corner, and even Trump himself, visibly moved by the vulnerability in her voice. Trump leaned in closer, his smile warm and reassuring, the kind of smile that carried not just words but a promise. "Absolutely, Lily," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "God will always be with you, every step of the way, through every hard moment and every victory. He's right there in your heart, giving you strength even when it feels like you don't have any left." He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in, then added with a twinkle in his eye, "And it's not just God. You know, your family, your loved ones, the nurses and doctors here, they're all in your corner, cheering you on. And me? Well, I'm part of your team too. We're all here for you, Lily." Lily's lips trembled, and for a moment, it seemed like she might start crying again. But instead, she smiled, a weak, tentative smile at first, but it grew, spreading across her face like sunlight breaking through the clouds. Her small fingers gripped the Bible in her lap, holding it tightly, as if drawing strength not just from its words, but from the love and encouragement surrounding her. "I'll try, Mr. Trump," she said, her voice growing steadier as she spoke. "I won't give up, I promise." Trump placed a hand over hers, his large hand enveloping her tiny one, and gave it a gentle squeeze. "That's all I could ever ask, Lily. Just take it one day at a time. You're stronger than you think, and I know you've got what it takes to keep going." Lily looked up at him, her eyes now filled with a determination that hadn't been there before. It was quiet, but it was powerful, a reminder of the resilience that existed even in the smallest, most fragile of hearts. The room seemed to breathe again, the tension melting away as her parents exchanged a tearful, grateful glance. The nurses standing by couldn't help but smile, their hearts warmed by the quiet strength of the little girl who had just decided to keep fighting. Lily's grip on her Bible tightened further, and she held it close to her chest, as though it were a shield against all the fear and uncertainty she had faced. And as she smiled at Trump, the radiance of her expression seemed to light up the entire room, touching everyone who witnessed it. In that moment, there was no doubt Lily wasn't just a little girl fighting a battle. She was a symbol of hope, a testament to the power of faith and love, and a reminder that even in the darkest moments, light could still break through. As Trump stood from his chair and prepared to leave the room, the atmosphere remained thick with emotion. The quiet hum of the medical monitors blended with the sound of Lily's parents moving toward him. Tears glistened in their eyes, though their faces carried a newfound sense of peace and gratitude. Lily's mother reached out, gently placing her hand on Trump's arm. Her voice trembled as she spoke, filled with both emotion and sincerity. "Thank you," she said, her words slow and deliberate, as though she were trying to convey the full weight of her gratitude. "You've given our daughter a reason to keep going. We can't thank you enough for that." Her husband nodded, his voice thick with emotion as he added, "We've seen her smile today in a way we haven't in months. You've given us something we thought we'd lost, hope." Trump paused, his expression softening as he met their tearful gazes. He placed a reassuring hand on Lily's father's shoulder and gave it a gentle squeeze. "It's your strength that inspires her," he said quietly. "I could see it in her eyes. She's fighting because she knows how much you love her. She's got a lot of people in her corner, and I'm proud to be one of them." He glanced back at Lily one last time. She was clutching her Bible tightly to her chest, her face now radiant with determination. She waved at him weakly, but her smile was strong, unshakable. Even, Trump raised a hand in return, giving her a small but encouraging nod before stepping out into the hallway. As he made his way toward the exit, the nurses lined the corridor, their faces reflecting a mixture of admiration and emotion. Some whispered their thanks, others simply nodded as he passed. It was clear that what had just taken place in that small room had left an indelible mark on everyone who had witnessed it. When Trump reached the hospital's entrance, he found a group of reporters waiting outside, bundled in coats and scarves against the biting winter air. The flash of their cameras lit up the evening as they called out questions. Eager to hear about his visit, Trump held up a hand, signaling for quiet. His expression was solemn but thoughtful as he stepped closer to the cluster of microphones. Taking a deep breath, he began to speak, his voice carrying a tone that was both steady and deeply personal. "Today," he said, pausing briefly to gather his thoughts, "I met someone who reminded me of something truly important. Strength. It doesn't just come from the body. It comes from the soul. And sometimes, the smallest people among us have the biggest strength of all." He stopped for a moment, his gaze drifting briefly to the hospital's entrance, as if he could still feel the presence of the little girl he'd just left behind. "A little girl named Lily taught me something today," he continued. "She showed me that faith and love are what carry us through life's hardest challenges. No matter how heavy the burden, those two things, faith and love, give us the power to keep going." Trump's voice grew steadier, filled with a quiet conviction. "And I believe," he added, "that all of us have a responsibility to help each other fight through life's struggles. Whether it's offering a word of encouragement, lending a hand, or simply being there for someone who needs it, we all have the power to make a difference." The crowd of reporters fell silent, their usual eagerness for sound bites replaced by genuine reflection. Trump's words hung in the frosty air, their weight undeniable. He took one final glance back at the hospital, a soft smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Then, turning back to the cameras, he said, "Lily may be fighting a hard battle, but she's not doing it alone, and neither are any of us. We're stronger when we stand together." With that, he stepped away from the microphones, leaving the reporters to process what they'd just heard. For once, the camera seemed less focused on capturing a moment and more on understanding its meaning. The story they would share wasn't just about Donald Trump's visit to a hospital. It was about resilience, hope, and the profound impact of one little girl's strength. The story of Donald Trump's heartfelt meeting with Lily spread rapidly, resonating with people from all walks of life. It wasn't just a tale of a fleeting hospital visit. It became a powerful symbol of resilience, faith, and the strength that comes from hope. For those deeply rooted in their faith, it served as a poignant reminder of God's unwavering love and the profound courage that belief can inspire. Lily's determination to keep fighting, despite the overwhelming pain and challenges she faced, touched the hearts of millions. Her story transcended barriers, reminding people of the importance of compassion and the unshakable power of faith. In the days that followed, Lily's courage became a source of inspiration for countless others. From children battling illness to adults navigating life's hardships, her strength reminded the world that even in the darkest moments, faith and love can light the way forward.